But Jacob, you mentioned Somalian migrants in the UK. There was a stabbing of an MP, Mr. Ames, David Ames. He was stabbed. He was pro-life. He was more conservative, and he was stabbed. Actually, we were filming last week when it happened, and so we couldn't get it on the last catching up. But it happened last week. Somalian origin, 25-year-old stabbed him as one of his one-on-one meetings that they normally do. But they went after him. Went after him, of course, Islamic terrorist, but also because of his pro-life and conservative views. It's happening.
He was a radical Islamic terrorist who came to Britain as a refugee from Somalia so he could stab a member of the British Parliament. That is what Islamic immigration means to fundamentalist Muslims. The Bush administration, the Clinton administration, they brought these same kinds of barbarians from Somalia into Minnesota. That is what Olmert is. She married her brother. They are bringing in people with a subhuman mentality. A radical Muslim is not like a moderate Muslim. They have a subhuman mentality. Can you imagine what would happen if Khan, the mayor of London, who's a Muslim, terrible mayor, but he's the mayor of London, if he was knifed in a mosque?
Oh.
But Mr. Ames was knifed in a church by a Muslim. The media plays that down. Instead, they're talking about, well, we have to stop radicalization online without hardly any reference to Islamic radicalism or the fact that Facebook will allow Taliban to have a website or a Facebook page. And we have to increase security for members of parliament. No, you've got to stop radical Islamic immigration. And there's no way to tell the difference between a moderate Muslim and a radical one most of the time.
Yeah. You know, I didn't know Mr. Ames was pro-Brexit, pro-life, against abortion, against immigration, unvetted immigration. And, I think in a lot of ways he was targeted. So, there's some warnings against,
His
more
murderer was on a terrorist watch list.
Incredible.
But politically, you're not allowed to do anything.
Yeah. Now, Jacob, this happens in France too, radically in France. And, what is his last name? Zemmour, Jean-Marie Zemmour.
Oh, yeah.
He's up on the polls, at least for now. But you were talking about Zemmour last week or the week before that. And but he's up in the polls against Macron. Does he have a chance, Jacob? Does he have a chance to return back to France to what he ideally thinks of France? A European nation.
Well, let's understand France. Let's understand Germany. What is happening in France? A retired Jewish school teacher, a woman, was murdered in her apartment and thrown out the window by a Muslim.
Whoa.
The court said the Muslim was not responsible for murder because he was high on marijuana at the time.
Oh, man.
This is the French court. A German court, the nation of the Holocaust. A German court decided that two radical Muslims who attacked a Jewish facility were not guilty of a hate crime. They acted with a political motive because of Zionism in Israel. This is Germany. These countries don't and won't change. It's in their character. It's the way they are. The only way these countries can ever change is if there's a high percentage of saved believers. But don't count on that either. Look what happened in the Reformation. Anti-Semitism increased because of Luther. This is what you've got when you have bad doctrine. And Lutheran doctrine is bad. Well, let's look at the situation. Well, it's not all bad, but it's never broke with Catholicism. Well, let's look at Mr. Zemmour. When the French Empire collapsed in the aftermath of the Second World War, the two biggest messes were in Vietnam and in Algeria.
Yep.
The Jews fled from North Africa. Some, mainly poor ones, went to Israel, the newly founded state. The more educated and prosperous Jewish business and professional community of North Africa, of French-speaking North Africa, went to France. Small number to Belgium, some to Quebec, Canada, the French-speaking area of Canada. But the largest number to France. Among them were Mr. Zemmour's parents, Algerian Jews or French Jews who lived in Algeria.
Yeah, very interesting.
Now he has absolutely no profession of the Jewish religion, but he's a Jew. Zelensky in the Ukraine is a right-wing Jew.
He's also a Jew, that's right.
In Europe, you had left-wing Jews like Kreisky, Bruno Kreisky in Austria, who was no friend of Israel, yet he was a Jew. He had a brother in Tel Aviv, but he was no friend of Israel. Now you have a Jewish leader in Ukraine and the prospect of another in France. He is a French nationalist. I suppose you might compare him a little bit to Barry Goldwater in the United States. Barry Goldwater was an American Jew, but he did not practice the Jewish faith. He was a nominal Christian, at least, but of Jewish descent. Politically right-wing conservative, American nationalist, a patriot. Okay? This is Mr. Zemmour. What's unique about Mr. Zemmour, although he would be in the same, broadly speaking, class with Donald Trump, Nigel Farage of Great Britain, Nigel Farage, and also Geert Wilders of Holland. He might broadly be in that class, or the leader of Hungary. He might broadly be in that class. He is first and foremostly an intellectual, an academic. The others come from business world or things of this nature, or from professions. He's an academic, which means he's an expert in the history of ideology.
True.
Being of Algerian Jewish descent, he understands Islam. He understands the mentality of Islam, but he understands the mentality of France. His strength is as an academic. He has outpaced Le Pen.
Yeah.
He is drawing more even centrist conservatives. He would identify himself as a Gaullist. A Gaullist is like a Republican in the United States, something like that. But the right wing of that. What troubles me about him is not that he doesn't deny his Jewish identity, but he has been somewhat accommodating. Again, he's an academic with a view of history. He's been accommodating of some of the French history that was not friendly to Jews. He has suggested that the Dreyfus affair, that Dreyfus may have been guilty or may not have been wrongly prosecuted when he was sent to Devil's Island. You had all these French intellectuals like Émile Zola and so forth get him out of Devil's Island. He was made a political scapegoat. And also he has made statements somewhat defensive of the Vichy. The Vichy were the French who basically decided to submit to Hitler instead of to fight. Right. Although France had 66 divisions and the largest army in Europe at the time, when the British were holding out at Dunkirk, the 66 French divisions wouldn't fight the Germans. They went under the Germans. You had a divided French underground that included everything from communists to patriots that collaborated with British intelligence. But basically, France wouldn't defend itself and collaborated with the Nazis in anti-Semitism. Now, I'm not saying every French person liked it or agreed with it. There were French people sympathetic to Charles de Gaulle, who was a refugee in England, basically. But that was Vichy France. And the Americans, before the Americans fought the Nazis, before Patton fought Rommel in North Africa. First time the Americans fought the Germans was in North Africa, before Italy, before Sicily, before Normandy, before any of that. The first fight was between Rommel and Patton. But before the Americans fought the Germans, they first fought the Vichy. The first enemy that the United States had to fight in France, in Africa, was the Vichy French. When the Americans invaded North Africa. The Americans fought the Vichy French, shootout, successfully, but a shootout. The British bombed French naval ships. The Royal Air Force and Royal Navy attacked French naval ships. This was the Vichy. And it's very unsettling when you have somebody, a Jew, not taking a more definitive stance on that dimension of French history. He talked about French history and the nobility of it and the preservation of the heritage. He talked about that, but he omits the bits that would in any way identify him as being more Jewish than French.
Well, it's going to be interesting. He's ahead on the polls now. If they had the election now instead of next year, he theoretically he can win, which is it's against the French political system and government. It's a little more complicated. They have a president, they have a prime minister. I'm not sure how they go about the voting part, but he certainly could win.
Of parliamentary and presidential government. It's not presidential like the United States. It is not parliamentary like Britain. They have a combination of the two.
Yeah. So I guess theoretically he could win and he could be the president. I'm not sure how much power he can wield without, the parliamentary side of the coin, but technically I guess he could win. And that's my point. He's ahead of Le Pen as a populist. And so it's surprising to me. It is surprising to me that, he wants no-go zones. He wants the stop of illegal immigration, especially for the Muslim world. He wants to return back to a more European-centric France. Which like you explained, could be for the good, could be for the bad if he's covering up some of the some history.
All of that is good. All of that is good and positive.
Right.
All of that is good and positive. My fear of any right-wing government in Europe is it will return to its anti-Semitic past.
Yeah.